The morning began like many others in Emily Harper's life, quiet, predictable, and wrapped in the soft light of a calm suburban home in Vermont. Outside, autumn leaves rested on the driveway, and inside, the house smelled faintly of toast and fresh air. It should have felt peaceful. Instead, Emily felt a strange heaviness in her chest, the kind she couldn't explain even to herself. She stood near the kitchen counter, her fingers lightly touching the edge, while her husband, Mark, moved around the room. He seemed more focused than usual, almost nervous. His movements were careful, his voice lower than normal. Emily noticed these small things because after 12 years of marriage, she noticed everything about him, especially when something was off. Mark placed a mug of coffee in front of her. "I made it just the way you like," he said, offering a small smile. Emily returned the smile, but the moment she leaned closer, her expression shifted. The smell caught her by surprise. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't right either. It wasn't the strong, familiar aroma of their usual dark roast. This smell was softer, slightly sweet, almost herbal. It reminded her of something unfamiliar, something out of place. She lifted the mug slowly, her mind racing. Mark watched her too closely. His eyes stayed on her face, as if he were waiting for something approval, maybe, or relief. Emily pretended to take a sip, but she didn't let the coffee touch her lips. She only nodded and set the mug down again. "It's warm," she said, choosing her words carefully. Mark nodded quickly. "Yeah, I thought you could use something comforting." The way he said it made her uneasy. Before Emily could ask anything, the back door opened. Sarah walked in, bringing with her a burst of cold air and laughter. Mark's younger sister was visiting for the weekend, and her presence usually made things lighter. Sarah was friendly, open, and easy to talk to, the kind of person who didn't hide her feelings. "Morning," Sarah said cheerfully. "Wow, it smells good in here." She grabbed a mug from the counter, the same kind as Emily's, and poured herself coffee from the pot. She didn't notice the look Mark gave her or the way Emily's fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the counter. The kitchen felt suddenly crowded, even though only 3 people stood there. Emily's thoughts raced. She kept replaying the moment Mark handed her the mug. The careful tone in his voice, the unfamiliar smell. The way he hadn't met her eyes for more than a second. None of it made sense, and yet all of it felt important. Sarah leaned against the counter, chatting easily about her drive from Boston, about the traffic and the radio station she listened to. Emily nodded along, but her attention was fixed on the 2 mugs sitting close together. Same color, same shape, almost impossible to tell apart. Mark's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, frowned, and stepped away. "I need to take this," he said quickly, already moving toward the hallway. The moment he disappeared from the kitchen, the air changed. Emily stared at the mugs. Her heart beat faster, not from fear exactly, but from instinct. A quiet voice inside her said that something wasn't right, and that she needed to pay attention. She thought about asking Sarah to switch mugs as a joke. She thought about pouring the coffee down the sink. She thought about confronting Mark right then and there. Instead, she did something much simpler. She reached out and switched the mugs. The movement was small and silent. No one noticed. No one said a word. It took less than a second, but it felt like crossing a line she couldn't uncross. Sarah picked up the mug that had originally been meant for Emily and took a sip mid-sentence. She paused for just a moment, her brows pulling together slightly, then shrugged and continued talking. Emily watched her closely, her chest tight. She waited for a reaction, anything. But Sarah just smiled and kept speaking, unaware that anything unusual had happened. Still, Emily felt the weight of her choice settle over her. Mark returned a minute later, slipping his phone back into his pocket. His eyes moved quickly around the room, then stopped on Emily's hands. On the mug she was holding, for a brief second his face changed. It wasn't anger, it wasn't shock. It was fear. Emily saw it clearly, and that moment confirmed what she already knew. The strange smell wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a new brand of coffee or a careless error. It was intentional. Mark forced a smile and sat down, but his body was tense. Sarah took another sip, laughing about something she saw online. Nothing happened. No drama, no sudden event. And yet the tension in the room felt sharp enough to cut through the air. Emily wrapped both hands around her mug, feeling the warmth seep into her palms. Her mind filled with questions she didn't yet have the courage to ask. Why hadn't Mark told her? What was he hiding? And why did it feel like this one small moment might change everything? The morning continued, ordinary on the surface. Breakfast was made. Plates were set. Conversations moved on. But inside Emily, nothing felt normal anymore. The smell of that coffee stayed with her long after the mugs were emptied, and she knew deep down that this was only the beginning. Sarah took another sip of coffee and laughed, but the sound felt too loud in the quiet kitchen. Emily watched her closely, noticing the smallest changes in her face. There was no panic, no pain, no shock, just mild curiosity. Sarah tilted the mug, looked inside, and shrugged as if the thought had already passed. "This tastes different," Sarah said casually. "Did you change the beans?" Mark froze for half a second. It was barely noticeable, but Emily caught it. His shoulders stiffened and his eyes flicked toward the mug in Sarah's hands. He forced a short laugh. "Kay," he said quickly. "Just trying something new." Emily stayed silent. Her heart was beating fast, but her face remained calm. She took a small sip from her own mug now, the one Sarah had poured for herself earlier. The taste was normal, strong, familiar. That confirmed it. Whatever was in the other cup had been meant for her. Sarah didn't think much of it. She kept talking about work, about the long hours at her design firm, about how tired she was of city life. Mark nodded along, but he barely spoke. His attention stayed locked on Sarah, then drifted back to Emily, as if he were counting seconds. When Sarah finally left the kitchen to take a call upstairs, the silence returned. Mark stood near the sink, pretending to rinse a spoon that was already clean. Emily sat at the table watching him. "You're quiet," she said. Mark didn't turn around, just tired. Emily let the moment stretch. She wanted him to speak first. She wanted him to explain without being pushed. But he didn't. He dried his hands, picked up his mug, and took a careful sip. His jaw tightened as he swallowed. That was enough. "Mark," Emily said, her voice steady, "why does that coffee smell strange?" He stopped moving. For a long moment, he didn't answer. The house felt too still, as if even the walls were listening. When he finally turned to face her, his eyes were full of worry. "I didn't think you'd notice," he said quietly. Emily stood up. "That's not an answer." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing once across the kitchen. "I was trying." "To help? Help with what?" she asked. Mark sighed and leaned against the counter. "You haven't been yourself lately. You're distant. You barely sleep. I see it every day, Emily." She felt a sting at his words, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. Still, that didn't explain the secrecy. "So you decided to hide something in my coffee?" she asked. "It's nothing harmful," he said quickly. "It's just an herbal blend. Natural. A coworker gave it to me. Said it helps with stress." Emily crossed her arms. "God, and you thought I wouldn't want to know?" "Thought you'd say no," Mark admitted. "And I was scared that if things stayed the same, I'd lose you." His honesty landed hard, but it didn't soften the truth. He had made a choice for her. He had crossed a line. Upstairs, a door closed. Sarah's footsteps moved down the hall. Mark's eyes flicked toward the sound. "She drank it," he said under his breath. Emily nodded. "Yes, she did." Fear washed over his face. "Is she okay?" "She said it tasted floral." Emily replied, "That's all." Relief loosened his shoulders, but guilt followed. Right behind it. He sank into a chair and buried his face in his hands. "I messed up," he said. Sarah returned to the kitchen a moment later, cheerful as ever. "You two look serious," she joked. "Did I miss something?" Emily smiled, faintly, just talking. Sarah glanced between them, sensing the tension but choosing not to press. She grabbed her jacket and keys. "I'm heading out for a bit. Thought I'd walk into town." When the door closed behind her, the house felt heavier than before. Emily sat back down across from Mark. "You should have trusted me," she said. "I don't need fixing." "I know," he said softly. "I just didn't know how to reach you anymore." The words hung between them, full of regret and longing. Emily felt the distance they had been avoiding for months finally rise to the surface. "This isn't about coffee," she said. "It's about us." Mark looked up, his eyes wet. "Then tell me what to do." Emily didn't answer right away. She stared at the table at the place where the mugs had sat earlier. One small switch, one small choice. And now everything felt different. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the trees. Inside, Emily realized something she couldn't ignore anymore. Whatever they had been avoiding was now in front of them, and there would be no going back to the way things were. The truth was out, and it had changed the shape of their morning forever.